Jackson Carter walked into the bank that morning with only one goal: cash a $5 million check before his company collapsed by nightfall. Instead, in front of dozens of customers, branch manager Catherine Blake coldly accused the single father of forgery and tore the check to pieces in his hands. Jackson did not fight back. He knelt down, gathered every torn fragment, and quietly asked her to verify the signature. Catherine laughed and called security. Then the glass doors opened and the bank's owner walked in, froze at the sight of him, and whispered in a trembling voice, "Dad?" Stay with this story until the very end to discover why the powerful bank owner called a single father Dad. The morning had begun in an unusual silence at Carter Pure Systems, a small water filtration plant on the outskirts of Charlotte, North Carolina. The machines had gone quiet because a supplier had refused to deliver raw materials until an overdue balance was cleared. More than 30 workers stood to lose their jobs if the company failed to make a payment before 5 o'clock that afternoon. Jackson Carter, 49 years old, a widower who had raised 2 daughters largely on his own, understood better than anyone what that deadline meant for the families who depended on him. He was a man of technical brilliance and almost no interest in appearances, the kind of person who judged value by what something did, not by what it looked like. Salvation arrived in the form of a check for $5 million from Meridian Water Technologies, the first payment for licensing rights to an industrial filtration patent Jackson had spent 12 years perfecting. He had refused to sell the patent outright, choosing instead to license its use so he could keep control of his invention and, more importantly, keep his workers employed. A representative from Meridian had confirmed by phone that the check was fully legitimate, issued through a verified partner bank, and ready to clear the moment it was deposited. Jackson pulled on his old work jacket, climbed into a pickup truck with more than a decade of dents in it, and drove toward Crown National Bank, the branch where his business account had lived for years. He had no idea that his company's loan had quietly been reclassified as high risk by a bank executive named Ryan Blake only hours earlier. Before stepping inside, Jackson took a short call from his grown daughter, who asked whether the company was going to be all right. He told her only that he was handling it, the way he had handled everything alone since her mother passed away. It was the only appearance she would make in the story that followed, a brief reminder of the quiet responsibilities Jackson carried without complaint. He walked into the marble lobby past customers in tailored suits, his work boots echoing against the polished floor, and felt the weight of dozens of eyes assessing him before he had said a single word. Catherine Blake, the branch manager, noticed him immediately, her expression sharpening the moment she took in his jacket and his truck keys still in hand. When she saw the number written on his check, she did not open the verification system. She pressed a silent alarm button beneath her desk instead. Catherine demanded to know how a man with a nearly empty account had come into possession of a $5 million check. Jackson calmly laid out the licensing agreement, the patent documents, and Meridian's contact information, but Catherine barely glanced at the papers before raising her voice, asking whether he understood that forging bank instruments was a federal crime. Customers nearby began turning to watch, drawn by the sudden tension in her tone. Jackson suggested she simply call Meridian directly or check the authentication code printed on the check itself, a request so reasonable that a passing employee slowed to listen. At that exact moment, Catherine received a short text message from her brother Ryan. "Do not let him deposit it. Keep him there." Believing she was protecting the bank from a con artist, Catherine grew even more forceful, declaring that the signature did not match anything on file, though she had never actually run the comparison. Jackson realized she had no intention of learning the truth and asked to speak with a regional manager or someone from compliance. Catherine sneered that men like him often walked in with a stack of forged paperwork, expecting to leave as millionaires. When Jackson reminded her that the check was a legal financial instrument and that she had no authority to destroy it, she snatched it from his hand and, in front of the entire lobby, tore it into pieces. The sound of ripping paper silenced the room. Jackson did not shout or threaten anyone. He lowered himself to the floor and began gathering every torn fragment, piece by piece, while Catherine ordered security to restrain him on suspicion of fraud. A young teller tried to interject that the system had just confirmed the issuing company was legitimate, but Catherine snapped at her to be quiet, and Jackson asked one final time whether she was certain she wanted this moment recorded in an official file. She answered that she would happily sign her name to it. The glass doors swung open, and Amelia Carter walked in with a team of internal auditors, arriving for a routine unannounced inspection. Every employee in the lobby rose to their feet at once. Catherine's posture changed instantly, and she announced with pride that she had just stopped a $500 million fraud scheme in progress. Amelia's eyes moved to the torn fragments still clutched in Jackson's hand, and her breath caught as she recognized a face that had haunted her for 10 years. Jackson froze as well, staring at the woman he had not seen since the day she graduated from college, the daughter he had raised after her parents died when she was only 12 years old. In a moment she could not control, Amelia whispered, "Dad?" and the entire lobby fell into stunned silence. Catherine turned pale, realizing the man she had just humiliated was apparently the father of the woman who owned the bank. Jackson did not use the moment to retaliate or demand an apology for himself. He simply asked Amelia whether her bank always treated its customers this way, a question that struck her harder than any accusation could have. Amelia immediately ordered every transaction at the branch frozen and instructed staff to preserve the full security footage without exception. She demanded Catherine's work phone be collected for an internal investigation, and when she asked who had authorized the warning that led to this, Catherine reluctantly gave up her brother's name. The moment Jackson heard it, he understood that none of this had happened by accident. Amelia offered to move him to a private office, but Jackson declined any special treatment, insisting the bank process his check exactly as it would for any other customer. Diana Madison, the bank's compliance director, verified the authentication code herself and confirmed the check was genuine, fully funded, and had already been reported by Meridian in advance. Amelia ordered the $5 million provisionally credited to Jackson's business account immediately, and Catherine was suspended on the spot pending review. Jackson still could not access the funds because the system suddenly froze his entire business account under a high-risk administrative order that had appeared out of nowhere. Diana traced the order and discovered, with visible alarm, that it had been approved from Ryan Blake's own administrative credentials only 10 minutes before Jackson had walked through the doors, a timing far too precise to be coincidence. Inside a private conference room, Amelia asked Jackson why he had reappeared after 10 years of silence, her voice tight with old hurt. Jackson told her, stunned, that he had never once chosen to walk away from her. The truth unfolded slowly between them. Amelia's biological parents had been close friends of Jackson and his late wife, and when they died in an accident when Amelia was 12, Jackson had taken her in without hesitation, raising her alongside his own daughter as one family. After his wife passed away, he had carried that responsibility alone, eventually selling most of what he owned so Amelia could attend a respected university to study finance. When she graduated, she accepted a position at Crown National Bank under Ryan's mentorship, and somewhere in that transition she had come to believe Jackson resented her choice of banking over the family business. Amelia recalled receiving a letter years earlier, carrying what looked exactly like Jackson's signature, stating that he no longer considered her his daughter. Jackson insisted he had never written any such letter in his life. He described attending her graduation only to be stopped by security because his name had somehow been removed from the guest list, and how every phone call he made afterward seemed to be quietly rerouted or ignored. Letters he sent to her apartment came back, marked undeliverable, or simply vanished without explanation. Once, when he visited the bank's headquarters hoping to see her, Ryan met him in the lobby and told him that Amelia no longer wanted contact with a father who might embarrass her fragile career. Believing he was respecting her wishes, Jackson stopped pushing, though he continued mailing a birthday card every single year, cards Amelia said she had never once received. Both of them now understood that someone had deliberately built a wall between them, brick by brick, letter by letter. Amelia sat back and thought of all the birthdays she had spent wondering why her father never called, of graduation photographs she had put away because looking at them hurt too much, and of a quiet resentment she had built brick by brick without ever once questioning the story she had been handed. She had told herself for a decade that Jackson simply preferred his own daughter, that she had always been the outsider in that household despite how much love he had shown her while she was growing up. Hearing now that every one of those assumptions might have been engineered by someone she trusted left her feeling strangely unmoored, as though the ground beneath 10 years of her life had quietly shifted without warning. Amelia wanted to trust Jackson completely, yet 10 years of grief made it difficult to fully let her guard down in a single afternoon. Jackson, for his part, refused to lean on their relationship as leverage, asking only that the bank release funds that were rightfully his before his deadline expired. Diana returned with troubling news. The freeze on his account was tied to a fraud investigation file that had quietly existed for 3 months. accusing Carter Pure Systems of using falsified invoices to secure previous loans. Jackson had never seen the file before and swore the accusation was false. When Diana pulled up the final digital signature approving that fraud file, the name displayed was not Ryan's, it was Amelia's own. Jackson stared at his daughter's name attached to the very document threatening to destroy his company, and for one terrible moment he wondered whether she had wanted him gone after all. Amelia denied ever seeing or approving any such file, her voice shaking with disbelief. Diana pulled the login records and discovered the approval had been logged while Amelia was hundreds of miles away at a conference in Chicago, yet the device used to sign it was registered inside her own private office. Only Ryan and one senior technical assistant held emergency access credentials capable of that kind of override. Amelia realized with a chill that her authentication key might have been duplicated without her knowledge, turning her own identity into a weapon against the people she loved. Ryan arrived at the branch with a small team of lawyers, feigning shock at the sight of Jackson standing in the lobby. He calmly explained that the system had flagged an unusual transaction and that Catherine had merely been protecting the bank from potential liability. He apologized to Amelia for what he called an unfortunate misunderstanding and suggested they settle the matter quietly to avoid unwanted attention. Jackson recognized immediately that Ryan was trying to repackage a deliberate scheme as an innocent clerical error. Ryan warned that releasing $5 million too quickly could expose Amelia to personal liability if the check were somehow connected to money laundering, though Diana firmly countered that the check had already been fully verified. Ryan pivoted instantly, accusing Carter Pure Systems of hiding the true extent of its financial troubles and producing a stack of invoices supposedly showing money being diverted from the company. Jackson examined the documents and confirmed that the receiving accounts did not belong to him at all. The entire paper trail had been fabricated using a forged digital signature. Ryan then suggested to the board that Amelia's leadership be temporarily suspended, citing her family connection to a man now under investigation, a maneuver that revealed his true target was never just Jackson. Amelia understood the trap closing around her. If she released the funds, Ryan would claim she had abused her position to protect her father, and if she refused, Jackson's company would collapse while Ryan quietly acquired his patent for pennies through bankruptcy proceedings. Jackson urged her to follow the law rather than protect him personally, accepting that his funds might remain frozen a little longer if it meant Diana could launch a truly independent investigation. Still, the company had only hours left before the bank could legally seize its equipment, so Jackson called his plant foreman, asking him to keep the workers calm without revealing how close they were to losing everything. Watching him prioritize his employees over his own crisis, Amelia remembered the father who once worked through the night just to cover her tuition. With less than 3 hours remaining before Crown National Bank gained legal authority to seize Carter Pure Systems, Amelia activated her emergency audit privileges as majority owner. She granted Diana full access to every file connected to Jackson, Ryan, and Catherine, cutting through months of bureaucratic walls in a single order. Jackson handed over his patent agreements, company ledgers, and copies of the letters he had once mailed to Amelia, several of which bore postal stamps marked "Recipient Refused," a claim Amelia insisted she had never made. Diana traced the mail forwarding address on those returned letters to a private asset management firm quietly linked to Ryan, confirming that someone had been intercepting their correspondence for years. Catherine initially defended her brother, insisting he had only wanted to protect Amelia from being taken advantage of by a struggling relative. Diana showed her the text message ordering that Jackson be detained before any verification had even taken place, and slowly the truth began cracking Catherine's loyalty. When Amelia asked whether she had ever been told to flag other specific customers, Catherine admitted quietly that Ryan had once given her a list of businesses to mark as high risk. Nearly every company on that list had later been purchased at a steep discount by an investment fund whose ownership was never fully disclosed. Jackson realized his company was never an isolated target but simply the newest name on a much longer list, and that Ryan had understood the true value of the water filtration patent for years, ever since Jackson had once proudly shown it to Amelia. Unable to steal the patent outright, Ryan had apparently planned to bankrupt the company first and then buy the intellectual property during liquidation for a fraction of its worth. Diana found a draft agreement projecting a resale of the very same patent to Meridian for more than $40 million once Ryan controlled it. Confronted directly, Ryan did not fully deny the scheme, arguing instead that the bank needed leadership willing to seize opportunity, rather than a woman too sentimental about family to make hard decisions. He announced that the board would vote to remove Amelia before the day ended, confident he already controlled enough votes to win. Without direct proof that he had forged the digital signatures, any premature move against him risked a lawsuit that could hand him control outright. So Jackson reminded Amelia that large fraud schemes almost always leave a trail somewhere. The perpetrator assumes no one will ever look, urging the team to hunt down the original paper records rather than rely on data that had clearly already been altered. The basement of the bank smelled of old paper and dust, rows of metal shelving stretching back into shadow far beyond what the overhead lights could reach. Diana moved methodically through the aisles, checking labels against a manifest she had printed only minutes earlier, while Jackson followed a few steps behind, quietly reading names on boxes that had nothing to do with him yet felt strangely familiar all the same. Somewhere among those forgotten records, he thought, were probably a dozen other families who had gone through exactly what he was going through now, never knowing why their loans had suddenly turned against them. Down in the archive, the original paper files for the loan had vanished entirely, but hallway security footage showed Catherine carrying a box out of the records room weeks earlier, acting on her brother's direct instructions. Confronted with the footage, Catherine admitted that 3 months earlier Ryan had asked her to move the original documents into a separate storage area, and she had believed at the time she was simply preparing for a routine audit. Ryan had later ordered the box destroyed entirely, though Catherine insisted she never burned anything herself, instead handing the box to a contracted document shredding service. Diana checked the shredding company's pickup schedule and discovered the collection had never actually been completed, since the driver reported a mechanical breakdown and the boxes were quietly returned to the bank's basement. Ryan had no idea this had happened, because Catherine had simply forgotten to report it back to him. The team searched the basement together and found the original file for Carter Pure Systems alongside records for 17 other businesses caught in the same pattern. The unaltered documents showed Jackson had always paid on time, and that his loan had only been reclassified as bad debt after a fabricated addendum was quietly inserted into the digital system. Tucked inside the same box was a copy of an acquisition offer for the company at a suspiciously low price, submitted through Ryan's investment fund. Diana also uncovered an old authentication device registered under Amelia's office credentials, the exact tool used to duplicate her electronic signature without her knowledge. Catherine realized Ryan had hidden the device inside the very box he intended for her to destroy, meaning he had planned all along to let her take the fall if the scheme ever unraveled. Catherine stared at the authentication device for a long moment, turning it over in her hands as though it might somehow explain itself. She thought back to the night Ryan had asked her to move the box, remembering how he had barely looked at her while giving the instruction, already distracted by something on his own phone. It struck her then that he had never once treated her as a partner in anything, only as a convenient set of hands whenever a task carried too much risk for him to touch personally. The realization did not arrive as anger so much as a slow, cold understanding of exactly where she stood in her brother's plans and how easily she could have vanished into a federal case while he walked away untouched. Understanding that her brother was fully prepared to sacrifice her, Catherine agreed to give a full statement, though Amelia made clear that cooperation would not restore her position. Amelia told her plainly that helping now did not erase the humiliation inflicted on a customer, the destruction of his property, or the abuse of her authority over an entire branch. Catherine accepted that she would face a formal investigation but asked for one chance to help stop Ryan before he caused further harm. Jackson did not mock her or gloat over her downfall, telling her instead that a mistake could be corrected, but only once the person responsible stopped making excuses for it. Catherine then revealed that Ryan kept a second phone locked inside a safe in his office, one she believed contained communications with board members and the investment fund itself. Amelia immediately ordered his office sealed, but by the time security arrived, the safe stood open and the phone was already gone, along with Ryan himself, who had quietly slipped out of the branch. Minutes later, the bank's monitoring system flagged an outgoing transfer of $30 million from the reserve fund, routed toward an account overseas and authorized under Ryan's own credentials. Ryan convened an emergency board meeting at headquarters, declaring that Amelia had lost sound judgment after suddenly reuniting with an estranged father figure. He presented the $5 million check as evidence of a suspicious transaction, conveniently omitting the fact that it had already been fully verified as legitimate. Several board members, unsettled by his framing, called for Amelia to temporarily step aside from leadership while the matter was reviewed. Amelia walked in flanked by Jackson, Diana, and Catherine, refusing to be sidelined from her own company's defense. The boardroom fell into an uneasy hush as the two men stood facing each other, one in a tailored suit worth more than most of his victims' monthly earnings, the other still wearing the same work jacket he had put on before dawn. Several board members exchanged uncertain glances, clearly torn between the polished confidence of a longtime executive and the plain, unhurried composure of a stranger they knew nothing about. Ryan sensed the hesitation and pressed harder, reminding the room of his years of service and the bank's obligation to protect itself from reckless liability. Jackson simply waited for him to finish, unbothered by the theater of it, the way a man waits out a storm he already knows will pass. Ryan mocked Jackson as a failing factory owner exploiting his daughter's sympathy, but Jackson made no attempt to defend his own dignity through argument. Instead, he laid out the company's full financial timeline alongside the signed licensing agreement with Meridian, letting the paperwork speak for itself. A Meridian representative joined by video call and confirmed directly to the board that the $5 million was a legitimate and fully documented payment. Diana followed with the recovered paper files, the stolen authentication device, and a list of 18 businesses that had been targeted using an identical pattern of fabricated risk flags. Catherine admitted publicly that she had acted on her brother's direct instructions and took responsibility for destroying the check in front of customers, a confession that visibly shook the room. Ryan immediately tried to shift every ounce of blame onto his sister, claiming she had acted alone and fabricated evidence out of resentment. Amelia pressed him directly about the $30 million transfer, and he insisted it had been an emergency liquidity measure to protect the bank from imminent collapse. Diana revealed that the receiving account belonged to a shell company secretly controlled by Ryan himself, though he remained composed, confident there was no direct proof linking him to its ownership. Jackson, quietly studying the paperwork, noticed the shell company's name matched a street near the neighborhood where Ryan had grown up, a small detail that sent Diana straight to the state's business filing records. The listed registering attorney turned out to be someone who had handled private legal matters for Ryan personally for years. Catherine then produced a recording of her final phone call with her brother, in which he explicitly instructed her to keep Jackson trapped inside the branch until the seizure order against his company took full legal effect. Ryan's composure finally broke, and he accused Catherine of betraying their own family in front of the entire board. She answered simply that family was never an excuse to destroy another human being. The board voted unanimously to suspend Ryan immediately and hand full investigative authority to Amelia. Federal agents, already alerted in advance by Diana, entered the building and took Ryan into custody on charges of fraud, identity theft, and illegal wire transfers, ending his scheme in front of the very people he had tried to manipulate for years. Even with Ryan in custody, the clock kept moving, and only 7 minutes remained before the automatic seizure order against Carter Pure Systems would take full legal effect. Diana tried to cancel the order manually but discovered Ryan had locked the process behind a board-level verification requirement before his arrest. Amelia technically held the authority as majority owner to override the freeze herself, but doing so risked the appearance of favoring her own father over proper procedure. Jackson urged her not to bend the rules on his account, telling her plainly that he would rather lose the company fairly than watch her compromise her integrity to save it. Amelia chose not to approve it directly and instead summoned 3 independent members of the risk committee within minutes. Diana laid out the evidence showing the loan had been reclassified as bad debt using entirely falsified documentation, while the Meridian representative confirmed once more that the funds had already been transferred and could not legally be reversed. The committee voted in an emergency session to release the $5 million and cancel the seizure order, finalizing the decision with less than 60 seconds left on the clock. Jackson called the plant immediately, confirming that payroll and outstanding debts would be settled on schedule, and the workers erupted in relief without ever learning how close they had come to losing everything. He used most of the funds to stabilize the company, pay down its remaining debts, and upgrade the aging production line that had kept the business alive for over a decade. Amelia offered Jackson formal compensation for the destroyed check and the public humiliation he had endured at the hands of her own branch. He accepted the settlement but asked that part of it be used to establish a fund supporting the other small businesses Ryan had quietly targeted over the years. Catherine was formally terminated and now faced a professional review that could end her banking career entirely, yet she thanked Jackson for not asking Amelia to destroy her life out of vengeance. Jackson told her he had no interest in revenge, only in seeing her accept the consequences of her choices and prove through action, not apology, that she had actually changed. Catherine promised to help the other victims of Ryan's scheme recover what had been stolen from them, a commitment Diana quietly noted for the record. As the room slowly emptied, Amelia reached into her bag and set an old letter on the table in front of Jackson, the same letter that had convinced her for 10 years that he had abandoned her. Jackson studied it closely and recognized that his signature had been carefully copied from an old loan document he had signed years earlier. The letter claimed Amelia was no longer part of the family because she had money over the people who raised her. Jackson told her the only thing he had ever truly wanted was for her to live a life free from the kind of financial fear that had shaped so much of his own. Amelia admitted that despite building a successful career, she had never quite felt like she belonged to a real family again after that letter arrived. She had spent years believing Jackson was ashamed of the choices she made. Jackson answered that he had been proud of her every single year, even during the ones when she never called him her father. Amelia apologized for trusting a piece of paper instead of simply showing up and asking him the truth to his face. Jackson admitted his own share of the blame, confessing that he had backed away too easily when Ryan told him she wanted distance, rather than fighting harder to see her himself. Neither of them could reclaim the decade they had lost, but both agreed they could still choose how they moved forward from that day on. Amelia wrapped her arms around him and called him Dad once more, this time not out of shock but with quiet, unshakable certainty. In the weeks that followed, Jackson returned to the quiet rhythm of running his plant, though something in him had loosened that had been tight for 10 long years. He no longer flinched when his phone rang unexpectedly, no longer wondered in the back of his mind whether the daughter he loved had truly chosen to disappear. Amelia, for her part, began making small changes at the bank that had nothing to do with policy and everything to do with the kind of person she wanted to be, greeting employees by name, sitting in on ordinary customer complaints herself, and reminding her staff more than once that a person's worth in that building would never again be measured by the clothes they wore through the door. 6 months later, Carter Pure Systems had expanded production and created dozens of new jobs across its growing plant floor. Crown National Bank launched a new program dedicated to protecting small businesses from predatory lending practices, built directly from the lessons of Ryan's exposed scheme. Diana was promoted to oversee compliance across the entire bank network, a role she had earned through patience and quiet persistence. Catherine, after completing her legal obligations, began working with an organization that supported victims of financial fraud, slowly rebuilding a life defined by accountability. Amelia visited Jackson's plant often now, not as the owner of a powerful bank, but simply as his daughter. The story closed on an ordinary afternoon when Jackson walked into the very branch that had once humiliated him, and a new employee politely asked if he needed any assistance. Amelia stepped up from behind, smiled at the room, and said, calmly and clearly, "You don't need to, I'll take care of Dad."